Chapter 241 Sacrifice to become stronger by Hydesgrain. Floating in the air with Till's manifested wings flapping once in a while, Jason still tried to wriggle out of his firm grasp. However, noticing that Till didn't seem to loosen his grip even a tiny bit, Jason was forced to give up, as he tried to face him head-on. If the foreign races arrive when I'm with the Drake family patriarch, everything might be destroyed, with millions of innocent lives being eradicated. Compared to Jason's fearful expression, Till's face showed a cold, yet confused expression when he heard, foreign races. He was on bad terms with them due to multiple reasons, and Jason behaved suspiciously, which caused him to doubt what the youth in his arms said. But even if Jason's behavior was weird, Syros City, or rather Asterix overall, couldn't take any unnecessary risks right now. As such, Till had to gather more intel. Slowly descending to the ground, they landed inside a lush park within the city's core area. Loosening his grip around Jason, Till indicated him to sit down, as he asked the obvious question with a firm and serious voice. "Why are you saying something like this? Is there something important you didn't tell anyone yet?" Jason was about to tell Till everything when he suddenly remembered various occasions when Till released his killing intent and anger towards foreign races, and he halted for a moment as he pondered what to do. Maybe I shouldn't tell him that I could be a halfling. Think about what to say. Jason tried to figure out the easiest path, as he hesitantly said. "I don't know how to put it, but when the 3 foreign races came to Syros City a few days ago, there was the time when Shane was called out by the Shadow Walker, right? After that, they halted in their tracks and gazed towards me. When they scanned through me, it was extremely weird, as if they wanted to do something to me. However, in the end, the Shadow Walker killed only the 2 foreign races and didn't kill Shane, after I attacked him with 3 darkness rays, right? In the end, it seemed as if the Shadow Walker said something to me in his language. However, without being able to speak this foreign language, I couldn't understand it, yet somehow my 6th sense told me that there was more behind this, and I'm only unable to comprehend it." Sighing inwardly, Jason was sure that he picked a relatively good reason, that the foreign races shouldn't see him for now, or at least until he figured out more. Even if he might have said too much, Till should already be aware of most of it, so Jason decided that it was not too bad to remind Till about everything once again. Syros City already faced too many problems, and challenging their luck was not something the Drake family could take head-on at the moment. Even less, because they were unaware at what rank the approaching foreign races were. Till was still suspicious about Jason, but hearing his reason, he nodded his head, because he already felt extremely weird that the Shadow Walker, which was a race commonly known for their cruelty and merciless slaughter, let go of Shane without killing him. Furthermore, he didn't do anything to Jason who tried to assassinate him, and after combining the facts about Jason feeling weird about the foreign race's gaze, Till tried to comprehend a reason. Looking at Jason, Till also remembered that Jason unintentionally absorbed a massive amount of mana from his surroundings without being able to do anything against it. Because the absorbed mana was immediately circulated into his eyes, Till was led to the conclusion that the foreign races were most likely interested in Jason's unique mana eyes, with their special abilities. Are his eyes that much of an advantage, even for the foreign races? He asked himself, but without more information, there was nothing he could do about it, as he sighed lightly. Opening the holographic screen on his quantum bracelet, he called someone. "What is it, little Gryle? Is the small boy misbehaving? Should I call someone over to drag him to me?" Hearing a tranquil, yet somewhat eerie voice, Jason's eyes quivered for a second, before he was able to control himself, as Till said. "Sir Drake, this is not necessary. I'm next to him right now, but he is about to break through, and forcing him out of his breakthrough might result in a damaged mana core. If Sir is fine with it, I'll wait for Jason to finish everything before I bring him over. Damaging our blossoming prodigies will only harm our already weakened population." Till didn't want to sound rude, but he tried to figure out a reason to have some time in order to comprehend what Jason told him before he would explain everything to the Drake family's patriarch. Knowing the patriarch since he was young, Till knew that he would either kill or subdue dubious humans with high potential under a harsh soul contract in order to secure his overlord position, while at the same time ensuring new powerhouses below him. Till didn't want that Jacen to be forced in signing a soul contract that would turn him into the patriarch's slave with multiple shackles forcing him into submission. In the end, there was also the possibility that Jacen would be killed if he was to reject the soul contract, which forced Till to lie to the patriarch or to find a simple solution to everything, without turning Jacen into someone suspicious. The small youth in front of him was just too innocent, yet extremely talented to let him be shackled down by someone. Well, I'm not fond of waiting, but you're right. I would be blamed if a prodigy were to injure his mana core while breaking through, only to appear in front of me. Place a few high-grade mana stones next to him to hasten up the process. The sooner he arrives, the faster I can leave this place. You know that I still have to suppress my new soul bond after that happened. After he finished speaking, the Drake family patriarch hung up, which caused Jacen to frown when he heard the last sentence. Jacen's eyes seemingly asked, what exactly happened with his soul bond? Till noticed this, as he smiled lightly with frustration, pain, and sadness shimmering in his eyes. I see that you're confused, but let me tell you one thing. Never ignite the Drake family's, or rather all big families' greed. Never. At least if you want to live in comfort. Looking at Till, Jacen was now more confused than before, as he unintentionally asked. Why? Looking into the treetop, Till explained silently, roughly 20 years ago, the Drake family were able to get their hands on an ice dragon egg, by stealing it from the mother dragon that killed probably several dozen Lord Stages and heavily injured 3 sovereign ranks. Jael Drake, the Drake family patriarch, however, didn't have enough space for another soul bond left in his soul world, while a dragon is said to take more space than normal beasts. As such, dragons are also labeled as higher beings, like some other beasts with the same characteristics, like a larger soul world demand, high mana affinity, strong physique, and extremely powerful affinity. To come back to the main topic, Jael Drake killed every single of his soul bonds, severely damaging his soul world, only to contract the ice dragon egg 2 years ago. He could only heal his damaged soul world by utilizing the Drake family's enormous funds and their ability to procure unique ingredients, able to slowly force his soul world to recuperate from its severe injuries. Just listen to my advice and don't ignite the big families, ancient clans, and all other hidden powerhouses' greed, without being able to protect yourself, okay? Till seemed to be sad and frustrated that someone treated their own soul bonds as if they were mere tools, which was entirely different from how Till treated his soul bonds, because he was them as a part of his family, which was different than how some other big families treated their soul bonds. Jacen was also taken aback by the Drake family patriarch's behavior, and from the voice call, he also figured out that he was not able to completely control the ice dragon, as of now. Killing his own soul bonds, after living with them for several decades, if not even a century or 2. I have to be careful. Before, Jacen didn't take the big family's greed seriously, but that changed after he heard that the Drake family patriarch killed his own soul bonds to receive more benefits, which was comparable to tearing out his own limbs, only to receive something, which was disgusting, yet it seemed to have benefited him a lot. Nevertheless, it was fortunate for him to have to meet Till because he seemed to be entirely different from the other big families, even if he still belonged to them. From his knowledge, the Grail and Jiwaya family were considered the most peaceful big families who also think that increasing their territory is a useless waste of human lives, which Jacen completely supported. However, Jacen knew that he had too many secrets that might ignite someone's greed, which caused him to feel naked all of a sudden when he perceived familiar, yet unknown mana fluctuations from far away. These mana fluctuations belonged to the Ganassia and the Deep-Sea Scion race, and he immediately figured that out because of the complex structure Jacen saw thanks to his mana eyes, and he felt extremely fortunate that they didn't seem to fight with each other, as they approached Syro City with a fast past. Chapter 242 Reminiscence by Hydesgrain. Fortunately, the 2 foreign races seemed to fly through different areas of the city, without releasing any mana fluctuations to scan through their surroundings, which was probably because they didn't want to bother about the weak humans below them. However, from the normal citizen's perspective, two humongous sources of mana flew through the sky, indicating powerful, not officially announced beings, which shocked them greatly, as they ran away in fear if their legs allowed them to. Some citizens collapsed on the ground, while others shivered in fear when the unsuppressed thick pressure radiating from the mana fluctuations brushed past them. Sighing deeply, Jason felt fortunate that the Ganassia and Deep Sea Scion race envoys didn't fly past them, and Till had to lie if he said that it was unfortunate. He was still trying to comprehend Jason's words, while Jason thought about the Drake family patriarch and that he was not someone he could take on lightly. As such, he had to be careful what to say, while revealing that he was Shane and Dalir's disciple could be compared to a death sentence. Trying to make up his mind, Jason decided to ask Till what exactly he should reveal and what to leave out. To this, Till remained calm, as he just said to tell what happened within the 4-star rift, while exchanging the information about his unique mana sphere bracelet with him utilizing mana stones. When Jason heard this, he looked at his bracelet and took it off, in order to store it within his spatial ring, which he also took off in order to put it into his pockets. As such, nobody should lead to a suspicious background, when he remembered his necklace with the miniature conservatory attached. Taking it off, Jason figured out that he couldn't store it within his spatial ring. With a spatial ring and a conservatory on him, he felt suspicious, which led him to ask Till if they could go back to the Flay's house for the moment. Thinking for a moment, Till also thought that hiding all suspicious items far away would be the best way to look ordinary. The only things Jason transferred to his storage device were his weapons, some food, and mana stones if someone were to ask anything about it, which was unlikely. Arriving at the Flay's house once again, they were confused about his early arrival, but seeing him storming into his room and leaving it a moment later, they couldn't help but feel that something was odd. However, Jason already left the house, with Till waiting for him, as he continued to tell Jason what he should leave out from his experience within the 4-star rift. Till was also not aware of all facts, but from what he knew, Jason could only survive thanks to his master's well-prepared defense measures, which included his mana grade 2 leather armor. In the end, nobody would really care how exactly he survived inside the 4-star rift because the Patriarch would most likely only want to know who the traitors within the 4-star rift were, while additional intel would gladly be accepted. With Jason leaving the 4-star rift, Till would take over the explanation, because he took him to the two of them, immediately after Jason woke up. Afterward, Jason should just behave innocent and as if he was overwhelmed by the situation happening in front of him at that time. In the end, you can just say that Shane and Dalir are strangers and you thought that the two of them were distant friends of old Drake or me, trying to help Syro City to overcome the threat of 3 foreign races. Nodding his head, Jason also thought of the same scenario, while he forgot the accessories he received from his masters which would definitely make him suspicious. As such, he was glad to have asked Till about his opinion, otherwise, it could have become problematic. Slowly flying towards the park once again, both seemed to be deep in their own world, thinking about all kinds of things, when 2 overshadowing screams resounded throughout the whole city, filling every living being with the deep sensation of agony, pain, sadness, and immense anger. These screams turned into cries that didn't seem to stop anytime soon, as Till was forced to halt his steps. Jason's eyes suddenly turned wet, without him intentionally thinking about anything sad, with the cries permeating the air around the city with its entire being, infiltrating Jason's deepest core, digging out all kinds of frustrating, sad, and other situations where his whole body was filled with anger. From his childhood, where he was bullied, his mother's death, the thought of her killer, the Ceres family behaving as if they cared while doing nothing seriously to help him, to the pain he went through over the last 6 months, all of that was suddenly brought to the surface, which caused Jason to cry, with thick tears pouring down his cheeks. What the hell is happening? Trying to gather his senses, Jason noticed that he was unable to do so, as he averted his gaze to Till, who was trying to sit calmly on the bench, with red eyes and tears pouring down his cheeks. Sighing deeply, Till tried to prevent Jason from seeing his tears, as he said with sorrow in his voice, "Please tell me exactly what you can see in the foreign race envoy's direction." Figuring out that Till wanted to remain strong in front of him, Jason did as instructed, with all kinds of emotions surging to the surface, filling almost his entire mind, which made it more difficult to see something through his wet eyes, as his sight blurred. What is this sensation? Jason never felt like this before, and it was abnormal that he and even Till weren't able to control their emotions at the same time, as he stared towards the city's core area. There, he could see 5 presumed sovereign ranks, with 3 of them radiating extremely strong mana fluctuations. However, that was not the most important thing, Jason perceived, because the mana enveloping the 2 foreign races was fully released, surging through their surroundings without differentiating between high-grade materials, soil. Fortunately, nobody else was immediately next to them, otherwise, every single living being at the lower ranks would have been crushed by the erupting mana, which flickered violently as it spread further. The fluctuations thinned out the further it spread, but what Jason saw and felt coming from these radiating mana fluctuations were pure emotions. His senses became much clearer when he noticed that, as he thought, not without showing a confused expression. These emotions radiate from the foreign races. Are they mourning the deceased? Jason was extremely confused, as Till behind him explained. We call this explosion of emotions within the mana reminiscence ceremony, because the exact same phenomenon happens every time the foreign races come to our islands or even Kanir to take the deceased back. However, the envoys never change in their facial expressions, which is a weird contrast. Still overwhelmed by the feelings that came back to the surface, he mumbled, "They cry inwardly and release their emotions within the manap," which was heard by Till, who could only nod his head, as he sighed. They also express humane emotions, huh? Not knowing what to answer, Jason felt also extremely weird, but there was no pity in his wet eyes, because the foreign race envoys that died didn't care a tiny bit about mankind and how many died because of them too. Rather than that, he noticed that his tears started to dry up, as he steeled his heart, thinking about the chaos that overcame humanity because of the foreign races that behaved as if everything belonged to them. They were definitely stronger than humans, but even if that was the case, humanity was still alive and didn't cease to exist. Chapter 243 Meeting by Hydesgrain. Till seemed to be extremely shocked about the fact that the foreign races expressed their emotions to such a degree. Humanity already expected something like this, but having the theory proven felt weird. Meanwhile, Jason wasn't sure what he expected from Till, but it was definitely not that he would be shocked about the fact that living beings had emotions. Was that not something commonly known? The reminiscence ceremony was just the way foreign races expressing their emotions, even if the extent was extremely humongous. As such, Jason couldn't help but acknowledge that the foreign races didn't seem to be as simple as humanity declared them. Comparing his knowledge about the foreign races from a week ago, right now, Jason felt as if his knowledge was much more profound. However, that was not everything, because Jason also became extremely interested in the foreign races. If his knowledge was not fundamentally wrong, the foreign races were seen as a smaller problem for humanity compared to the terrifying beasts when the mana outbreak occurred. In the end, the foreign races forced humanity to stay on Kanir and the archipelago, without whipping them out or pursuing them further. This, in addition to the facts about the foreign races' individual scheming, attacks, or abduction and manipulation of humans, were most likely the only thing they did to intervene in humanity's growth. But why would they bother to nurture the Goblin King then? Jason suddenly remembered. Considering that the Goblin King had a rare blue fire affinity mutation, it was only obvious that the Black Origin Flame would be used to further enhance the Goblin King's mutation and affinity, but the real question was already stated in this case. Is there even a reason for such a drastic measure? He genuinely began to wonder. Thinking about every piece of information he had, Jason could only conclude a few scenarios. The first scenario was that the foreign races divided mankind's territory amongst themselves in order to prevent any clashes with each other However, Jason ignored this conclusion almost immediately, thinking about the time where the three foreign race envoys talked to each other, with the Shadow Walker saying that they were already in the war. As such, Jason thought the second scenario might be the most possible one. The second scenario was that some big families were able to communicate with foreign races. With this, they probably struck a deal, that was most likely, about the destruction of the Drake family's island, and maybe even more than that in exchange for anything valuable. But, in this case, what is valuable enough for the foreign races to exchange it with the Black Origin Flame? Thinking about this, Jason couldn't find an answer right off the bat, until he remembered the most likely reason for humanity to stay alive, even though they were much weaker in comparison. To the foreign races, the soul awakening humans undergo was probably the most valuable thing humans could offer. Did some big families offer humans with a high soul awakening star rating as exchange? Without being sure about his assumption, Jason didn't dare to utter it, but the more he thought about it, the more likely his assumption seemed to become. What a bullshit! Jason almost exclaimed, with Till seated next to him. The two of them minded their own business, and Jason didn't want to continue his train of thoughts, which led him to open a book about alchemy he downloaded some time ago. Fortunately, his emotions calmed down without any other disturbances, while it seemed as if the foreign races remained with the three other sovereign-ranked humans. One of them was the Patriarch, while the other two were most likely just his followers, and considering that they were not the sole sovereigns in their family, clan, or whatever, Jason could estimate the rough number of sovereign ranks humanity had. In the end, even if Shane was a sovereign rank, his soul bonds were not extraordinarily good, while his growth during the last several decades was greatly hindered, almost nullified, because he was forced to stay hidden. This meant that Shane's superior strength was less powerful, against the assumed number of 300 sovereign ranks humanity had altogether. Maybe there were more, but Jason thought that 500 sovereigns were the highest he could imagine, with a handful of them being stronger than that, either infinitely close to the next rank or barely broken through. However, Jason couldn't know that, and he just decided to not bother about uncertain facts, as long as possible. Reading for a few hours, Till suddenly stood up, with the two foreign races ascending into the air. Jason noticed Till and looked towards the foreign races, and after they left Syro City, the two of them waited for an additional half an hour, before Till picked him up in order to fly towards the Patriarch. Approaching Syro City's center, Jason felt extremely uncomfortable, and landing in front of a large tower, exactly in the center, didn't help him out. Rather than that, he began to eye the large tower, with the magic device that controlled the dome installed at the top, trying to calm himself down. Entering the building, Jason noticed a large number of government workers hurrying from one place to another, while their expressions were still saddened by the astronomical amount of emotions that invaded them. Not wanting to experience the reminiscence ceremony from such a short distance, as the government workers, Jason was already glad that they were far away from the center at that time. Entering the elevator, the two of them were brought to the highest floor, where Jason also perceived the three sovereigns, with old Drake, Max, and Seren arriving. They're also questioned. Jason wondered, and it seemed logical to not only ask him but also the others, as he remembered that Till already told him this, which caused him to sigh in relief. Arriving at the top, they entered a single room, with a spiral staircase leading towards the Mana Dome application. The room was surrounded by thick, mana-tempered glass and allowed one to look down, as Jason finally dared to look at the 6 persons in front of him. Approaching him, a middle-aged man with dark blue hair, radiating a perilous, yet also somewhat gentle aura, turned around, staring straight into his eyes. He didn't even show any emotions, as he nonchalantly asked, "You're the boy with mana eyes?" The Patriarch Jaildrake spoke to him, in a cold, yet demanding voice, and Jason felt uncomfortable being looked down on by him. Gathering his courage, he continued to stare into the Patriarch's eyes, saying, "Yes sir, my name is Jason Stellar." Jason was intrigued about the Patriarch's strength and decided to take a look at his mana core, which was hardly possible before due to the vast difference. However, from a distance of a few meters, Jason could tell that Jaildrake had 3 solidified prismarine crystals consolidated inside his mana core, which was one more than Shane had. While his mana core was additionally enlarged by roughly 15%, the Patriarch had only an ice affinity, but it seemed to be an extremely strong one, and from Till, he knew that it hailed from the Ice Dragon, that was probably a low monarch ranked beast, or something comparable in order to enlarge the Patriarch's mana core by 15%. More shocking was, however, that the Patriarch's mana was completely transmuted, and it seemed as if it was completely different from anyone else he ever saw and much more distinct and powerful at that. Jason was extremely shocked, but he forced himself to suppress his emotion, as he thought, is his cultivation method different, or was this caused after contracting the Ice Dragon? Averting his gaze lightly, without trying to attract any suspicion, he glanced at the 2 sovereigns behind, as he noticed that both of them had a single solidified prismarine crystal, that seemed to be extremely crude and on the brink of breaking, while their soul bonds didn't seem to amplify their mana core by much. If Shane was in his top form, he would definitely be able to defeat the 2 sovereigns behind the Patriarch, without much effort, which caused a faint smile to emerge on his face. Jaildrake noticed this as he noticed Jason gazing at his subordinates, with interest gleaming in his eyes. "Is something interesting about the 2 behind me?" Saying this without any emotions, Jason couldn't help but be taken aback, as he tried to answer, without revealing what exactly he could see. "Sir, please don't misunderstand. I was just curious about their strength because I can faintly see their mana fluctuations, while I'm unfortunately unable to see through the firm concealing behind Sir's mana. Sucking up to others was extremely annoying, but Jason couldn't reveal the extent of his mana eyes, which would bring him many problems. Even revealing that he could perceive the sovereign's ranks behind the Patriarch might already be too much. However, Jaildrake seemed to be disappointed about his revelation, as he averted his attention to Old Drake. "Didn't you say that his eyes are superior to all mana eyes you ever saw?" "This is disappointing. Even if he saw Max's physique, without being able to see through my perfect concealment, this is useless against the foreign races." Chapter 244 Useless Trash by Hydesgrain. It seemed like the Patriarch lost his interest in Jason, which almost caused him to shout out in joy if he was not surveyed by a few powerhouses around him. As such, he had to put on a charade with him looking to the ground. He hated to behave like this, to the core, but he had to endure it for now until he would become strong enough to defend himself. Old Drake was discussing things with the Patriarch, calling Jason a prodigy, while the Patriarch retorted with him barely being at the 4th adept rank, which was not even remotely considered as prodigious for a 14-year-old youth, even if he was from Asterix. In comparison, he even named Seren, who was crippled, until 6 months ago. Smiling inwardly, Jason couldn't help but voice out in his mind, "I also started with my journey 6 months ago and I'm stronger than Seren. What crap is he talking about?" without having gathered any information. However, instead of being sad about his negligence, Jason was extremely happy. Seren and Max stood suddenly next to him, as they inquired about his well-being, while Seren also asked about the flays. Telling them that everything was fine, Seren sighed in relief, while Max just stood silently next to the 2 of them, not saying anything at all. He was visibly uncomfortable, and Jason noticed him eyeing the Patriarch once in a while. Seren also noticed it, as he said, "Are you still uncomfortable around your father?" "Well, to be honest, that's nothing surprising." After the 2 overcame the arrival of the foreign race envoys, Seren and Max became much closer as both of them were happy to have survived a calamity. Over the last 3 days, they talked about all kinds of things, and Max cleared some misunderstandings about their childhood and that he was told by his family to treat him badly, in order to humiliate the Jiwaya family. Without knowing what exactly anything like that meant, when they were young, Max just followed the given order, without thinking about what he did. Seren felt still uncomfortable about his childhood, but he was not someone who liked to hold grudges, and after surviving the last week, he was just glad to have someone to talk to. While one topic was the foreign races, the main subject was Jason. Both were curious what exactly his eyes were and how strong he was, with his two affinities he already showcased. Seren was not much more knowledgeable than Max about Jason, so the two of them just concluded a few facts. As Seren, remembering that Jason had not only Artemis, an unknown beast with a fire affinity, as his soul bond, but also a small scorpion, he couldn't help but question Jason's soul world, whether it was its size or how many soul energy units he had. To the two youths, Jason was a mystery, but Seren liked him a lot, while Max didn't seem to hate him, because he treated him like a common human, without having a bias or something due to his status. It felt good to be treated like a normal youth, even if he behaved arrogantly, Jason retorted, instead of backing down, which was the common reaction he received. They continued to talk for some time, until the Patriarch turned back to them, coldly demanding, "Show me your soul awakening star rating." Jason didn't know what old Drake said to the Drake family Patriarch, but he seemed to be slightly angered, with his impatience shown all over his face. Not minding what exactly was going on, he opened his quantum bracelet and searched for the official certificate he got sent from the Beast Pagoda. Soul awakening. Out of. It was clearly written that his soul awakening was below average from the basic factors that were assessed, also called soul world size and the soul energy units upon his soul awakening. Looking at his soul awakening rating, the Patriarch frowned, as he turned around, almost growling. "Old man. Even though you lived longer than I did, with a high contribution to our family, who the hell do you want to fool, by telling me that this useless trash is a prodigy?" Even if his battle awareness, comprehension ability, and even mana aptitude were superior, with a 2-star soul awakening rating, he will only be able to fight against foreign races at a lower rank, due to their high innate physique and larger mana core size. Old Drake was equally astonished because he heard about Jason's soul awakening for the first time, and his attempt to lure Jason over to their own family shattered immediately, as he frowned deeply. Why did Shane and Dahlia accept Jason as their disciple, with such a soul awakening? Frowning, when he was called useless trash, Jason would have loved to jump up and beat the Drake family Patriarch into a pulp, but that was obviously not possible. Furthermore, he wanted to continue to live, which caused him to grit his teeth and endure everything as of now. However, while everyone else was displeased and disappointed with Jason's soul awakening rating, Till, who already knew about it, was almost unable to suppress his smile, while Seren and Max looked at Jason in astonishment. Looking at them, he couldn't help but smile, apologetic, because he roughly knew what caused them to look at him like this. "My current soul bonds are almost my limit." It was a lie, but because Seren already saw him with Scorpio and Artemis, while there was still an unknown fire beast, Jason had no other choice. In the end, Seren was naive and innocent, while Max was a stranger to him, who only knew about his two mid-evolved affinities. Having 2 soul bonds at the age of 14 was already unique and rarely seen, but 3. That's a whole different league. Jason thought that both Seren and Max might think with his lie that his soul bonds had vast potential, leading him in contracting them, but after saying that he almost met his limits, his soul world's potential would be used up once all of them reached their own racial and potential limits. Normally one would be rather careful with deciding their soul bonds, which caused both Seren and Max to misunderstand Jason's prior behavior as negligent thanks to a large soul world. Hearing his lie, they felt suspicious, but the soul awakening ranking wouldn't be wrong, because it was even acknowledged by the Beast Pagoda, which was a serious organization that was acknowledged by all powerhouses. Jason could also demand a reassessing, but there was no need for him to do so because it wouldn't benefit him in any way. Rather than that, it would most likely cause devastating damage to him, if the Drake family Patriarch were to find out about his soul world's capabilities. Old Drake's expression soured, after figuring out his soul awakening star rating, and Jason felt weird about the old man who seemed to be desperately trying to force him over to their side, as Jael Drake turned towards the 2 still standing sovereigns, announcing, "This is such a waste of time, we'll depart now." Turning to Max, he casually said, either stay or come with us. Sighing, Max pondered for a moment, when he asked Seren, you're only here for your second soul bond, right? Message me after you contracted it. I'll fight you then. Smiling lightly, he followed his father and the two sovereigns behind, after saying goodbye to old Drake. Till meanwhile, was completely ignored, and he wondered what happened, that the Drake family patriarch didn't even bother to ask Jacen about what happened within the 4-star rift. Suspicious. It was definitely weird, but even more so was old Drake's desperate behavior, trying to lure Jacen over to their side, even if it meant to force him into a soul contract, once he attracted the patriarch's attention. Jacen was even more displeased about old Drake's behavior, and he completely ignored his whole existence, as he turned to Till, asking, I'm probably done here. Why did they even bother to ask me to come over, if I'm only going to be insulted, without asking anything about the 4-star rift? Sighing deeply, Till just said, I think you're done, and to be honest, I have no idea what happened right now. If that helps you in any way. Jacen didn't even bother asking Till if he could bring him back, as he walked towards the elevator, after briefly saying goodbye to Seren. Calling a shuttle, his mind was filled with a deep sensation of betrayal and anger towards old Drake, who would have most likely sold him out, immediately after Shane and Dahlia fled. The only positive aspect was, that Shane forced a soul contract on old Drake, preventing him from telling the patriarch anything about Shane at all, which included Dahlia and him being the disciple. Sighing deeply, a sudden thought shocked him greatly, can I even trust old Drake with sending me somewhere else as an exchange student? What if he tells other families about Shane and Dahlia's whereabouts, even if he were to die? Chapter 245 Scheming by Hydesgrain. Inside the elevator, Jacen was fuming in anger, as he thought about old Drake's behavior, without knowing why exactly the old man acted like this. He would have really sold me as a slave, huh? Concluding the intel Till told him and adding old Drake's desperate tries to tie him to the Drake family, even if that meant he would be forced into signing a harsh soul contract, that would make him no different than a slave, Jacen couldn't believe what happened. Fortunately, my soul awakening star rating was so bad. Sighing in relief, he immediately thought about Shane and Dahlia's situation and their trust in old Drake. This is bad. If they tell old Drake where they want to set up their new hideout, it might as well end devastating for all three of us. Is it even safe to remain on Asterix now that I know about old Drake's scheming? Figuring out the main problem, Jacen felt extremely uncomfortable to continue staying on Asterix, at least as long as old Drake was able to monitor his steps. This is so creepy. Thinking about the possibility of old Drake kidnapping or doing something similar in order to have him inside his grasp, Jacen couldn't help but feel disgusted, as the elevator arrived on the first floor. Leaving the elevator, he was more than glad that Till seemed to be different, because he warned him to stay low-key and not to reveal too much about himself, while at the same time warning him about the Drake family's patriarch's greed and cautiousness against even the slightest suspicious prodigies. Thinking about this, Jacen was extremely thankful to Till, and entering the shuttle he ordered, Jacen continued to think about what he should do, once he calmed down from his chaotic mix of emotions inside his. When I arrive at the Flays, I should immediately message Dahlia and Shane. Even if I only have a few calls in total, this is too important to neglect. Making up his mind, Jacen could only sigh, as he analyzed what exactly happened. If he didn't understand everything completely wrong, old Drake should have praised him a lot, which caused the patriarch to become interested in Jacen. Even if this alone was not the problem. Jacen doubted that old Drake was not aware of his own descendants' behavior towards all kinds of prodigies. He didn't even want to imagine what would have happened if the whole capabilities of his mana eyes and soul world had been exposed. I would be either dead or enslaved, huh? Jacen thought, with goosebumps covering his whole body, as he finally understood what kind of calamity he escaped from. Arriving at the Flays, it was already lunchtime and everyone sat down to eat, as they greeted him. However, instead of eating together with the Flays, Jacen excused himself and went into his room, because telling Dahlia and Shane what happened without further ado was much more important for now. Taking out his spatial ring and the conservatory necklace, Jason wore everything in the designated position, before he took out the messenger crystal and his unique mana sphere bracelet from his spatial ring, which he also wore at his right wrist. Looking at the messenger crystal, he injected mana into it, activating the extremely complex set of runes on it, with a faint, almost invisible thread shooting into the sky, through the rooftop. Seeing this, he was sure that it was only thanks to his mana eyes that he could even notice the thin thread. Staring through the ceiling, Jason's mana eyes perceived a similar state to a radar, trying to sense the opposite messenger crystal, and he finally understood what exactly the runes were. The runes on the messenger crystal were a combination of a sender and a receiver, but even if it seemed simple, in order to inscribe such fused runes with two usages at the same time, was extremely difficult. Suddenly Jason heard a faint crackling, and after a few moments, he could finally hear a familiar voice, as Dahlia worriedly asked, "What's wrong, Jason? It hasn't even been that long and you already made a mess." It seemed as if Dahlia wanted to ease her own tension with the last sentence when she heard Jason's calm, yet somewhat frustrated voice. "Hello, Master, I didn't do a mess, but it seemed as if old Drake is not as trustworthy as we imagined him to be." Explaining everything to her, Dahlia was more shocked than Jason himself, and it was most likely because she knew him for 2 centuries. She would have never thought that old Drake might acknowledge the Drake family's patriarch's system to subdue promising youths in signing a soul contract. But not only did it seem that old Drake accepted that, but he passively tried to hint the Drake family patriarch into forcing Jason to sign such a contract, which would make him no less than a slave. Shocked about the revelation, Dahlia wasn't sure what to think about one of the only allies she trusted almost completely, and she felt speechless. Figuring out that she was unable to speak for a moment, Jason used this time to ask her what he should do or if their plan had to be adjusted. "Should I leave Asterix right now, or wait for some time? I don't think we can trust old Drake about your new hideout, or even which island the two of you want to retreat to, and to be honest, I feel uncomfortable with old Drake around." After Jason said so, Dahlia remained completely silent, and apparently, she needed some time to think of a solution, when she answered after half a minute. "You shouldn't leave Asterix for now, it would be extremely suspicious and there is no way for you to flee with your current capabilities. Shane is also asleep and it will take at least a month until he recuperated most of his combat prowess. How about you join the Big 3 tournament, and behave as if this morning with the Patriarch and old Drake never happened. I will also continue to stay in contact with him, and once he sends you to the island I name as our new hideout, Shane will come and take you. At least, if he recuperated enough to use his spatial portals multiple times in succession, otherwise, you would have to wait until everything is prepared. If you were to vanish from the other school, you were sent as an exchange student, it might cause a commotion, but old Drake wouldn't know where exactly we would bring you." Thinking about this plan, Jason couldn't help but say frustrated. "So, in conclusion, it's a stay put and behave tactic until I leave the Drake family's territory as an exchange student." Somehow he could only frown as he could visualize Dahlia nodding her head on the other side of the connection, as she said, "Yes, at least roughly. If old Drake wants to send you somewhere else, just send another message, and Shane will wreak havoc on Asterix and bring you over, even if he has to create a massacre. But this is not likely if the Drake family patriarch left with his sovereign-ranked subordinates. Don't worry too much and behave like you always do. I doubt that old Drake can do much after the patriarch rejected you. The only thing you should be careful of is the Big 3 tournament. Maybe old Drake wants to record it and send everything to the patriarch, in order to prove that you're worth his attention." Nodding his head, Dahlia's word made sense, and even more so the last sentence. Without being able to understand what exactly old Drake thought, he might as well try to record or even stream the tournament in order to show the patriarch his results. Even if others may think that Jason had few chances to reach the later rounds of the tournament, with his current strength, he might already be able to fight the prodigies from the big three schools, at least if he were to expose every trick in his sleeves. I should remain rather low profile, huh? Thinking about this, Jason nodded because it was the best he could do for now. There was still slightly more than a month until the tournament started, and with 3 different tournaments for each year, it would take at least a month to finish or even enter the later rounds. As such, Jason was sure that he would improve a lot when he noticed the messenger crystal's signal weakening. Suddenly Dahlia said, "Have you already found the 2 blessed technique manuals in your spatial rings?" They're the originals, but unfortunately, the Shaw and Blair clans could only translate it to a marginal degree. Shane can't use his deceased family's blessed technique and wanted to give it to you because he thought that it might be useful. With your Black Origin Flame, the translated part of the blessed technique Shane received from the Shaw family might be beneficial for you. If not, it's also not a problem, we can look at it later. Take care of yourself and don't make any trouble, at least until we can protect you, alright? Taken aback about what Dahlia just told him, Jason couldn't even comprehend what happened, as he faintly uttered a "bye" before the bright complex rune on the messenger crystal diminished. Shaking his head, Jason was taken aback, as he began to wonder what exactly happened, as he scratched the back of his head. Why are my masters so weird? Am I also like them? Chapter 246 Revamped Cultivation by Hydesgrain. Jason continued to look at the messenger crystal, without averting his gaze, as he thought about Dahlia's words. Did she say 2 blessed martial art techniques? Aren't blessed techniques from rifts or other foreign races? How could they even translate that? And why the hell did they give me the original and not only the translated parts? Why are my masters so naive? I could just betray them if I wanted to. The most shocking to Jason was the trust his masters gave him, without him having done anything to earn it. Did he receive gifts, knowledge, and even 2 original blessed techniques from his teachers, just like that? In the end, he was their disciple without question, yet he was neither forced into a soul contract to stay loyal to them or anything like that. Shaking his head, Jason didn't know what to think about his master's mindset, as he tried to remember what he knew about blessed techniques. Blessed techniques hailed from other races, that were either extinct and humanity found the remains in ancient ruins within rifts, or the other foreign race gave humans such techniques, after making a deal, which was not unlikely, after considering what he got to know over the last few weeks. Alone from Seren's floating sky, blessed movement technique, Jason knew how valuable blessed techniques were, and thinking that the floating sky technique was most likely also only partially translated, his curiosity soared immediately. Throwing the messenger crystal into his spatial ring, he immediately searched for the 2 blessed techniques, only to find them hidden within the basic lifestyle occupation tools. Taking the 2 manuals out, Jason immediately perceived strong and distinct mana fluctuations radiating from the expensive parchment as he carefully inspected the ancient-looking manuals. Reading the unknown language, Jason felt it was somewhat familiar, as he continued to read the words below with a light frown emerging at the same time. Ancient Hellfire Tribunal. Opening the first page, Jason's frown deepened as he compared the translations to the weird, yet aesthetic written letter above. That's wrong. From the translations, he figured out that the blessed technique was said to be some sort of technique that increases one fire resistance while it should stimulate fire transmuted mana within the body to circulate smoother, without any hindrance. With this, someone who cultivated the Shaw's blessed technique should be able to cultivate faster in hot places with fire transmuted mana, as long as they had a fire affinity, which was a requirement to even practice the technique in the first place. However, Jason felt that the translations were somewhat lacking and it was extremely weird, as his head began to ache, with something deep within him forcefully shaking. His eyes and soul world suddenly trembled and Jason noticed that it was similar to the time he began to understand what the foreign races said. However, in order to do something like this, he thought that he would need an astronomical amount of mana once again. Nevertheless, thinking about old Drake who might send someone to monitor him, Jason was forced to remain low-key, forcing him to take out a bunch of high-grade mana stones in order to absorb them instead of going outside to gather natural mana. Even without Jason doing anything at all, once he took out a bunch of mana stones, his body seemed to work by itself, as it greedily absorbed the mana in his surroundings, only to gather deep within him, where he perceived a weird presence emerging. Closing his eyes, Jason tried to explore his own body, as he seemed to see the outlines of a tall man, whose aura overshadowed everything. These outlines grew with the amount of mana injected, until it reached a height of multiple 100 meters before everything was released at once, with the overshadowing aura spreading through his whole body, causing him to groan in pain. However, compared to the first time he felt this, the second time was much gentler, with his brain aching for barely several seconds before he could once again see the outlines of the tall man standing straight in front of him. Jason was unable to perceive anything else, as he heard an extremely quiet, "I have let you two down," before the outlines dissipated into thin air as if they never existed. Opening his eyes, he was extremely confused, but with his head aching, and his automatic mana absorbing decreasing, when his soul world stopped trembling, and he couldn't help but ask inwardly, "Who the hell was that?" "I think I'm slowly going to become insane." Trying to distract himself, he averted his attention back to the manual in front of him, when he noticed something shocked. "I can read it." Seeing that, he exclaimed out loud, before he closed his mouth immediately, as his eyes widened. "How the hell can I read the letters in the unknown language? Were the outlines not an illusion? What did it say? Let you two down. Now don't tell me that it was my father." Looking at the manual in his hands, Jason couldn't understand what was going on and he just started to assume everything possible. How should his father be able to enter his body? Considering that his mother told him that she never told his father that she was pregnant, in addition to the foreign race's shocked expressions, who normally don't express their feeling this way, Jason doubted that the Celestia race would let go a half Celestia, half human baby, if they knew about his existence. At least that was what Jason thought, because the foreign races seemed to be extremely shocked about his existence, which seemed to be special. As such, he concluded that his father really didn't know anything about him, which made everything even more implausible. How should his father even know that he existed, if his mother left him before he was born? Jason couldn't answer this question at all, but the fact that he was suddenly able to read the foreign language could only be seen as extremely beneficial, because the translations seemed to be almost completely wrong while only a marginal part of the whole manual was translated. Trying to ignore the outlines he previously saw within him, Jason smiled as he read the technique's title once again. Terra Intermediate, Netherworld's Fort. It was completely different from the translations, and what made him curious was the first two words, Terra Intermediate, because the intermediate mankind used was often utilized in order to further divide a technique's grade further or someone's cultivation progress within the current mana core rank. If Jason was not wrong with his assumption, this Terra should be the technique's grade in front of him, further divided into intermediate, which might be the same intermediate humanity used as in basic intermediate advanced. However, the bigger question was now, if the Terra grade was good or bad for him. There might as well be many more different grades. Jason was just not aware of an understanding that was not simply to digest. If even the technique name on the cover could tell him so much information, Jason wondered what he could figure out if he were to read through the whole technique. Taking a deep breath, he opened the manual once again and started to read. Entering a state of full concentration, hours passed with Jason's facial expressions changing from astonishment and interest to shock with a slight trace of curiosity, until it ended with a mix of a devastated expression and the desire to figure out even more. The sun rose, shining straight on Jason's eyes, as he closed the manual, even if he only read the introduction with the requirements and basic information. However, even this was already too much for him, as he thought, shocked. Everything was completely wrong. Apparently, the manual was one of the most commonly used techniques in order to refine the body and belonged to a race called Kaladar. There was not much information about the race, and the only thing Jason could get to know about it was that there were two different types of the Kaladar race, while both of them had a strong fire affinity, which was the most important requirement to refine their body. The technique was also divided into two different approaches in order to refine the Kaladar race's body. A basic path for their less intelligent and four-legged offspring, that seemed to be the most commonly used path for colliders, indicating that they had more four-legged individuals, while there was also a more advanced path for more intelligent, bipedal colliders with an extremely high mana sensitivity and aptitude. Jason couldn't really do anything with this information, but what really mattered was the stated requirement for each body refining stage, which shocked him greatly. Comparing mankind's cultivation knowledge with a race that was assumed to have gone extinct, Jason couldn't help but shake his head, trying to prevent the shock within him from spreading further. Isn't it ridiculous? Thinking that we were about to reach the summit with our strength, only to see a larger mountain behind. I already assumed that our cultivation system and maybe even that the physical advancement with each increase in rank might be slightly off, but getting to know that humanity was completely wrong. Jason was unsure how to digest everything, and he decided to write everything important down in order to comprehend the vast information he got to know over the last day. Massaging his temples, he murmured, "So, to put it simply, the foreign races are innately only slightly stronger than humans and are unable to defeat beasts at the same stage under normal circumstances. By refining their physique with a technique like the Netherworld's fort I have in front of me, they acquired a physique equally strong to beasts at the same stage as they are. Furthermore, mankind's cultivation system is completely wrong. They call the novice, adept, expert, and master rank just mortal stage, or also the gaseous state of mana within the mana core, which is continuously growing. After that, they have the lick stage, which consists of the compressing process from the gaseous mana into liquid, until the mana core is filled with enough liquefied mana drops in order to enter the next stage. As such, the lick stage is a combination of the Magus, Grand Magus, and Lord ranks. The third stage is called the Prisma stage, after the process of solidifying prismarine crystals within the mana core. This stage includes the sovereign rank and the following ranks humanity would have to create first, once someone reached it. Maybe there is already someone thinking about how to call the rank above the sovereign rank. As if it was not shocking enough that the third stage for the foreign races consisted of humanity's strongest powerhouses and even more, Jason also figured out how the fourth stage was called, as he mumbled to himself. Fusing the soul every living being awakes at a certain age, with the mana core by creating a sona seed, one would enter the ascendian state, which is said to take centuries, under bad circumstances until the seed blossoms. Raking his head, Jason couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with the provided information, while even the summary bothered him. Chapter 247 Netherworld's Fought by Hydesgrain. 5 days passed with a new week starting when the Big Three schools announced that they would continue with their lessons, while they also reassured that the Big Three tournament would start 1 month from the new week on. However, Jason didn't care about anything like this at all, because the only thing he spent the last 5 days on was trying to understand the two blessed, or rather terragraded techniques, which included the casual information in the introduction part of what exactly the technique could do. While the Netherworld's fort technique he read at first was a Terra intermediate technique, the other technique, which came probably from Shane's family clan, was called Darkness Proselytism and was a Terra basic technique. With this, Jason's assumption about the further grading of techniques was proven, but this didn't help him much, because the combined information of both techniques was still too shocking for him. Other than reading and trying to understand both techniques for 5 days straight, Jason barely ate and slept, and he only practiced the Heaven's Hell technique in order to distract him slightly. His soul energy reached 636 units, which was his sole reason to be slightly joyous, while the intel he gathered was a complete contrast. Not only was it apparently true that Argos was a lower planet, due to its recent awakening of mana, but there was an unimaginable number of such planets, which indicated that humans were not only extremely weak but nothing special at all like they always imagined. With this knowledge, it was obvious that there must also be a gigantic number of foreign races that humanity was unaware of. But even worse was that the known foreign races were barely either the younger generation or seen as average subordinates, comparable to a butler or slaves from mankind's perspective. Among the lower planets, Argos was also called an infant, because the planet core reawoke its dead mana heart due to the unknown meteorites that entered their stellar system. Unfortunately, there were no further information about something like this, which Jason found frustrating because he was curious how Argos awoke its natural mana, which changed everything for humanity. However, this didn't change the fact that mankind would have some problems if they became too strong, because the foreign races from the higher planets or even the older, lower planets would try to restrict humanity's growth in order to maintain their livestock for possible strong soldiers. After figuring out that it was possible for the foreign races to strengthen their body in order to fight beasts head-on, without the need for strong affinities or even soul beasts, which was the way how humanity survived the last 3 centuries, he could only estimate how strong a human would become if they practiced a body refining technique in addition to being able to contract beasts that would amplify both physique and the mana core size to a certain degree. Is that humanity's real strength? Suddenly goosebumps covered his whole body at this thought, and initially, he wanted to message Dalir and Shane about this, when he remembered that the messenger crystal had only a few calls left, which had to be used for emergencies. He was unsure how many calls in total he had, so it was better to restrain himself from calling his masters. One could say that his gathered intel was important, but comparing it to a life and death situation, it might be better to put it back in his priorities, without harming anyone. In the end, humanity didn't know the information he acquired for over 3 centuries without going extinct, which was already more than enough to tell him that he could wait another month. While the Netherworld's fort was a body-refining technique, the eradicated Blair family clan's technique, darkness proselytism, was used by a race with a strong darkness affinity in order to transmute neutral mana into darkness mana. However, the density described was extremely thick and distinct, not comparable to the transmuted mana humans received by contracting a soul bond with an affinity. There was only one problem, which was only described in a few sentences, because it was unimportant for most foreign races, with the most important information being: this technique is unusable for races with one or multiple additional affinities other than a darkness affinity. After reading this, Jason felt sad for a moment, because he was unable to use it either way, until he noticed that he didn't even have a darkness affinity, which caused him to smile lightly about his own stupidity. Well, it doesn't matter then, huh? Jason thought, because he already possessed 3 different affinities when he was reminded about the Drake family patriarch's transmuted mana. Was that another reason for him to kill his soul bonds? That he only possesses a single affinity in order to practice a Terra rank technique. The more Jason thought about it, the more likely it became, causing him to frown. So the Drake family either colluded with foreign races or made a deal with them. He imagined, because it was unlikely that the Drake family found an ice dragon egg and coincidentally their blessed technique was compatible with the ice affinity. It could have been a fortunate coincidence, but after old Drake's behavior, Jason decided to not trust anyone from the Drake family anymore, while at the same time thinking the worst-case scenario about them. Like this, he wouldn't be shocked if anything special happened, or if something unpredictable would be revealed. Nodding his head, Jason took another glance at the Netherworld's fort body refining technique, pondering if he should practice the technique or not. The requirements were simple, because there were 2 paths, with the advanced path for bipedal races like he himself was as a human, which fitted perfectly, while the other requirements were a large mana supply, nutrition, and a high-quality fire affinity. Unsure what exactly a high-quality fire affinity was, Jason estimated that his origin flame could be considered 1, or at the least, it should be extremely close to 1. However, there was one thing Jason was unsure of. Inside the Terra Intermediate technique, there was written that the body refining technique would not only refine his body but also renew his cells, adjusting them to adapt to extremely high temperatures. In the end, Jason never heard of a human using a body refining technique, which was quite problematic, because he had 3 different affinities from 3 different soul bonds, and if his refined physique would clash when he wanted to use other affinities, it would be extremely bad. There was no remark about the Netherworld's Forte technique being unable to practice if one possessed multiple affinities at once, as it was the case with the darkness proselytism technique. But the biggest contrast between the 2 techniques, Jason noticed, was that the darkness proselytism technique seemed to be used by multiple races, at least according to the introduction part, while the Netherworld's Forte was customized for the Kaladar race. This was a huge difference, and it could mean that he might even be unable to practice the Netherworld's Forte technique, without obstructing other paths, as he thought about what Dalir told him about the technique, which was not really much. She only told him that his black origin flame might be helpful, but the most important fact was that she didn't warn him about any possible danger. This couldn't be taken as evidence or something similar to that, but it at least hinted to him that the translations which were practiced by the eradicated Shaw clan didn't create any disadvantages. Pondering for some time, Jason felt somewhat bewitched by the possible advantage a refined physique could bring him, compared to other humans and even foreign races. In the end, humanity seemed to be stronger than most other races, as long as they had good soul awakening with a decent body refining technique, which was an essential difference compared to what mankind thought about themselves. They might even be able to fight against the foreign races if more humans learned about body refining. Unfortunately, it would be counterproductive for Jason if he were to write down the whole Netherworld's Forte technique, because once humanity started to learn it, other foreign races would notice this and eradicate any kind of possible threats, before anything worse happens. As such, he had to remain calm and stay low profile in order to prevent foreign races from finding him. So, there is now another reason for foreign races to pursue me. Quite ridiculous, if someone were to ask me. Still staring at the body refining manual in front of him, Jason decided to give the Netherworld's Forte a try, because the Shaw family also survived, even if they were annihilated by his master. In the end, I can test my affinities after every single refining sessions, he thought, trying to reassure himself that he could just stop practicing the technique, once a marginal amount of discomfort would emerge when using a different affinity. Taking a look at the time, he opened his quantum bracelet and used some of his remaining star notes in order to purchase medical solutions with a high amount of nutrition. Even if they were extremely expensive and normally only used by old or extremely sick people, Jason needed a large quantity of nutrition. Unfortunately, humanity was not prepared for a body refining technique that demanded high nutrition, while the only technique that required nutrition was the Heaven's Hell technique. However, the difference between the 2 techniques was that the Heaven's Hell technique could be supplemented after practicing, if necessary, while body refining required a constant supply of nutrition, at least during the whole practice session. In the end, the required nutrition was also much larger if one were to compare both techniques. It was as if one tried to compare a small sea with an ocean, and Jason felt already the huge burden he had to face once again, even after he accumulated a vast fortune thanks to the elemental crystals. I need to improve my basic lifestyle occupations to earn more money, otherwise, I will be poor, before the Big 3 tournament even finishes. Single quote. Chapter 248 Initial by Hydesgrain. Purchasing a large number of Grade 2 mana stones and high-quality medical solutions for 2 star notes, Jason wanted to test the waters first, before he would invest more into refining his physique completely. The majority of his current investment of 2 star notes was in mana stones, which he needed either way while he didn't use much money to purchase the medical solutions. Because the delivery service would require some time, Jason worked out and went outside the house for the first time in several days, where he noticed Greg practicing a martial art technique. Smiling lightly, he noticed that his friend seemed to have improved once again, because he entered the 7th adept rank, even if it was still unstable. Seeing Jason, the 2 greeted each other, before they sparred for an hour, until Jason's package finally arrived, as he received a notification on his quantum bracelet. While Jason seemed to be totally fine, Greg laid on the ground, with extreme difficulties to breathe, as he looked at his friend in shock. How can his physique already reach the expert rank? Just wait until Taurus evolves, then I'm going to beat you once again. In the end, Greg was easily defeated, because his physique was slightly lower than Jason's, even if it was already infinitely close to the first expert rank. With his berserk ability, he could fight Jason rather easy head-on and even overwhelm him, but he couldn't suppress the wild instinct and charged mindlessly at his opponent, once he sustained even the slightest injury. If Jason didn't have any affinities, Greg might be able to win, but in the end, 2 affinities at the mid-evolved rank and Jason's strong physique overwhelmed him, which led Greg to lose miserably. Sulking for a moment, he regained his senses, as he swore to himself that he would work hard in order to not fall back, even if he was already sure of the fact that Jason would soar extremely fast. Greg was extremely bothered by that fact and also jealous, but there was nothing to change, because Jason's talent and determination were hard to achieve. Even if he already worked extremely hard, Jason seemed to work multiple times harder. Jason rushed towards the street, where the drone descended, only to scan his ID, before it soared back into the sky after the package was delivered. Storing everything inside his spatial ring, he rushed back to his room, where he took out a large basin, which he filled with water that he warmed up by igniting his Black Origin flame to a certain degree. Not being able to hold back his impatience, Jason pulled out a medical solution, which he immediately dissolved in the warm water, before a thick aromatic scent permeated the air inside his room. Should I have bought an isolation magic circle? He asked himself, noticing a faint colored hue filling the air, as he shook his head. It would cost too much to purchase a portable isolation magic circle, without considering the necessary supply of mana, while inscribing it by himself was still a far-fetched dream, because his proficiency with runes and mana circles could be considered as non-existent. He inscribed only 2 runes until now, and they were extremely crude, not even worth mentioning in his opinion. As such, he disregarded the possibility of inscribing runes by himself for the moment, until he would have accumulated enough practice. When will I even start learning how to inscribe? Jason thought, because he couldn't take any time with rune inscribing for now due to the necessary practice he required to concoct the Lesser Minotaur Bloodline Unsealing Potion in roughly 1 month if the ingredients were to arrive on time. Thinking about this, Jason turned slightly nervous, but this wouldn't help him a tiny bit, and focusing on his current task would be much more important than anything else. Currently, he didn't have to go to school, because he was thrown out of the special combat class, due to him applying for a leave of absence, while the theoretical lessons were also not mandatory for him anymore. As such, Jason was able to focus on himself to the fullest, which included the body refining which he was about to practice for the first time, as he pulled out a mountain of mana stones, which he laid around the basin. More is always better, right? Smiling lightly, he took out the remaining medical solutions, which he laid on a small table next to the basin. If he required more nutrition, Jason could just take one of the medical solutions from the table, without the need to leave the basin, which might interrupt his concentration. Rephrasing the first steps he learned completely, Jason took off his clothes, before he slowly descended into the basin. Only his head protruded out of the water surface, and he immediately felt his temperature rising, as his pores instinctively opened in order to accept the nutrition within the medical solution. Knowing what to do, Jason visualized every single step in his mind before he started the Netherworld's 4th initial body refining phase. In order to truly start refining his body, Jason would have to slowly adjust his feeble body to the changes, until he could truly start by tempering and refining his whole physique. This adjusting phase was also called initial phase, because it was the phase everyone had to go through as if it was the origin of the whole body refining process. With a serious expression, Jason started to loosen up several dozen threads from the mana stones around him. Leading them to him, he felt mana surging inside his entire body, filling every single cell within him. However, the same happened with the nutrition in his body, and it seemed as if they were competing against each other, which caused his body to itch slightly. Igniting the origin flame in his body, the already thickened soul connection inside his soul world glimmered lightly, and it seemed as if the black flame screamed out in joy, as it occupied Jason's entire being, with feeble flames. Will this be enough? He began to worry because he already felt that his black origin flame was unable to occupy his whole body while increasing the flame's temperature at the same time, with its current capabilities. Pondering for a moment, Jason was sure that his black origin flame would be powerful and durable enough in order to test the Netherworld's Forte technique's efficiency and dangers. In the end, he would have to see how good it worked and if practicing the technique would cause any obstacles for his other affinities before he would even start to inspect the technique's efficiency in depth. Slowly exerting the Netherworld's Forte technique according to the described way, Jason immediately felt a colossal surge of the nutrition and mana within his body, which forced him to groan, as his whole body roared out as if it was a fierce beast. Ugh! Lifting his hand out of the basin, he could barely grip the medical solutions on the table, before he threw all of them into the basin while releasing the mana within the all-mana stones around him. Biting his lips, Jason could only lament about his stinginess, even though he knew that the initial phase was said to require the most nutrition, due to the body's lack of high-quality nutrition in normal cases. However, the described requirements were still lower than what Jason bought when he suddenly remembered that he was a completely different race in a different environment. Calling himself stupid several times because he didn't think about such a basic thing, as he remembered that the Kaladar race had a higher innate physique which already included better food, a better environment, and many other reasons that could have prevented Jason's form his idiotic stingy purchase. However, in the end, with all medical solutions dissolved inside the warm water, that slowly heated up due to the black origin flame, which seemed to scream in joy to finally be allowed to exert its fullest strength, everything worked out fine. Continuing to exert the Netherworld's Fort body refining technique, Jason gritted his teeth, until he sensed that some cells within his body began to change, and with his eyes wide open, he could perceive an extremely faint red, blazing hue around it. With this, he stopped exerting the body refining technique, with his black origin flame entering Jason's soul world once again, as he switched between all three affinities he currently possessed in order to see if there was any problem. However, to Jason's fortune, there seemed to be no problem for now, and rather than that, his black origin flame circulated smoother through his body to an almost invisible degree. Jason wouldn't have noticed this, if the changed cells that gleamed in a faint blazing hue didn't brighten up when the black origin flame circulated exactly through the specific area where the changed cells were situated. Without being able to suppress, there was only one thought in his mind. Let's hasten up the process. As he finally told his black origin flame what he wanted to do for long. You're allowed to feast only my soul energy. Annex every single vacant soul energy unit. Quote. Chapter 249 Alchemy to Go by Hydesgrain. Greedily devouring the vacant soul energy units inside his soul world, the black origin flame flickered vibrant, as it began to grow in size. From the small, thin fingertip-sized flame in his soul world, it reached the size of Jason's fist, which caused him to smile weirdly, as it was nothing compared to the flame's size if he supplied it with his whole mana. However, once the black origin flame annexed his soul energy, it immediately left the soul world on its own as if it wanted to demonstrate to Jason that it would work hard in order to receive more benefits from him. Wanting to continue, he suddenly noticed that his soul energy neither increased nor that his mana core size nor his physique were amplified in any way. But being reminded about what Dahlia told him, an origin flame was different from other soul bonds because it wouldn't amplify the host's strength in a normal, more common way. Rather than that, origin flames were known for their baptism, which would increase the physique, enlarge the mana core, while cleansing the body from impurities at the same time. In the end, such a baptism was worth much more than a simple soul bond that would amplify one's strength and mana core size once bound. The only slight downside was that Jason didn't know when his black origin flame would evolve into a tier 1 origin flame, after annexing an unknown amount of soul energy units. It was only fortunate that he received some sort of discount to evolve his origin flame if what Dahlia said was true, because the required soul energy to initiate an evolution would decrease according to the amplification the host's soul world core provided. At least that was how it worked for Dahlia, even if Jason was unsure how she calculated it. Deciding to trust Dahlia's words, he thought that even if it was wrong, it wouldn't really hurt him, because it was unknown how much soul energy units his black origin flame required to evolve either way. With his soul world core amplification of, Jason could be satisfied either way, and there was nothing to complain, as the enlarged black origin flame occupied every single cell in his body, before it churned up, transmitting the thought of determination and ambition towards him. It really is a sentient flame, huh? He began to wonder, and even more so, because Jason never felt so many emotions transmitted from his black origin flame, that was quiet almost all the time. Exerting the Netherworld's fort technique, his body was overwhelmed by both nutrition and mana once again, forcefully trying to destroy, renew and recuperate his cells, which was extremely painful in the beginning. However, confusing enough, with his black origin flame increasing its temperature, Jason felt a soothing warmth surging through his body, and the pain was replaced by a peaceful and relaxing feeling he never felt before. It was definitely not normal that he didn't feel any pain, because his body was being destroyed and repaired all over again, which should hurt in his opinion, but nothing like that was the case. Instinctively, Jason thought that something was wrong, but he couldn't stop, as he received a reassuring signal transmitted from his origin flame, telling him that he should worry less. Apparently, it was his black origin flame that prevented him from feeling pain, by soothing the whole body refining process, instead of intensifying the pain, like it was described in the manual. This ability was apparently something the black origin flame had, and Jason was unsure if it was the same ability as the one he got to know within the Four-Star Rift, where his black origin flame helped him out in order to reform the transmuted mana into neutral mana, without any issues. Either way, it was definitely beneficial, and he would never complain about something advantageous, as he opened his eyes, once the supplied nutrition and mana were completely used up. Standing up within the basin, he tried to feel the changes within his body, only to notice that his physique seemed to be more refined. If he were to compare his previous physique to the slight changes he underwent, Jason would most likely think of it as if his prior body was a raw ore that was slowly heated up, in order to extract the impurities and slug in order to temper and refine it, slowly creating a tougher, more endurable and powerful weapon. Right now, he was barely in the initial phase, but he doubted that he could leave this phase before he entered the lick state, or also called Magus stage for humans, by compressing and liquefying his mana. Jason was still unsure how to call the stages in his mind, but right now he was in humanity's territory that couldn't understand the revamped cultivation ranks, causing him to utilize the old names, at least for now. In order to enter the first body refining stage of the Netherworld's fort technique, he would have to build the foundation, which was the initial phase he already started to establish in his body. However, the manual said that one would have to strengthen the mana core, which builds a flawed physique. This flawed, or also raw, physique could be refined by a body refining technique. This told Jason that he had to continue increasing his mana core rank to be barely eligible to refine his physique, even if he was unsure how exactly it would work with the amplified physical strength humans received from their soul bonds. It was interesting, and his curiosity ignited because he wanted to know if he could enter the first body refining stage even before entering the master rank if his soul bonds amplified his physique by such a high degree, which was a possible theory. Nevertheless, this was something for the future, and rather than thinking too far ahead, Jason decided to think about the present issues. There were two issues, or rather main tasks, he had to take care of. First, he wanted to increase his physique further, while experimenting if it was possible for him to continue practicing the Netherworld's fort without obstructing his other affinities, which still seemed to work perfectly fine. At least that was the case for now. Building a strong physique by refining his body would cost a fortune, which he noticed after his first body refining attempt, and he could only frown at this thought. Fortunately, he still had some funds left, and in the worst-case scenario, he would have to use his lifestyle occupations in order to solve his problem, which was something he wanted to do either way, as it led to his second issue. The second issue was relatively simple, yet complicated, because he had to learn how to concoct a bloodline unsealing potion in a month, or at most 2, without having any prior experience with doing something like this. It was unfortunate, but he wouldn't be able to accumulate much practical experience about the concocting process for Beast Creator Evolution Solutions, due to the high costs of the ingredients. In the end, the only advantageous fact was that Dahlia gave him her personal diary about her experiments and experience in concocting, which she accumulated over 2 centuries. Furthermore, she told him that concocting a bloodline unsealing potion was one of the easiest evolution solutions to produce, which was the reason for him to remain calm. Additionally, Dahlia explained that practicing concocting the most difficult grade 1 potions should have roughly the same difficulty. As such, his goal was to learn to concoct several of the most difficult grade 1 potions perfectly, within a month. Thinking about his financial problem, Jason was sure that concocting the most difficult grade 1 potions, perfectly without a single trace of impurities left, would bring him a fortune, at least he hoped so. Thanks to the trip to the Goblin settlement and him selling the Cloud Titanium Anvil, Jason already possessed the required ingredients for almost all grade 1 potions, inscribing solutions, and ores to forge weapons, while he also received a large number of grade 2 ingredients which were completely disregarded by him, seen as unimportant for his current circumstances. Pondering for a moment, where he might receive a discount for a large bulk of mana stones and medical solutions, he immediately disregarded Old Drake as an option, while Till might be suspicious about him, which was also not what he wanted. Jason was still not sure how to handle Till, who seemed to hate all foreign races to the core, which was noticeable due to him releasing a faint killing intent with dense wrath intertwined when he talked about foreign races. Without wanting to risk anything, he suddenly remembered someone who could help him, as he called the Artisan Tower President Cheng. While talking, Cheng seemed to be confused, but in exchange for star notes and also elemental crystals which he revealed, the rank 6 blacksmith couldn't help but feel overjoyed, accepting the deal of supplying the youth with all grades of mana stones and medical solutions, in order to receive a fixed ratio of elemental crystals and star notes, that seemed to be less worthy in the artisan's opinion. Smiling lightly, Jason was glad to have accepted the Artisan Tower President's contact details, after he forged with him last time, as it decreased many burdens. Now I'll only have to set up my alchemy room, huh? He thought, wondering how he should explain everything to the Flays. However, weirdly enough, his request was accepted without him being asked anything. To the Flays it seemed that it was the most obvious thing to do, because he had been accepted as a disciple from a beast creator. Both beast creators and alchemists had to concoct potions, while alchemy was more focused on quantity, cheaper yet more efficient potions that everyone could purchase and use. Beast creators focused on quality, complex and expensive potions with prices ranging from several hundred star notes to millions that would be used for the sole purpose of forcing soul bonds to evolve into higher beings. Another difference was that beast creators were still rarely seen and not many were able to take on this occupation because a single mistake might lead to death, while researches about possible evolution paths and required ingredients could take several decades. In the end, beast creators were seen as some godlike figures from some humans, because they could change the fate of beasts by evolving them, changing them completely. Meanwhile, alchemists were also in high regards, but there were many more of them, at least for the first few ranks, because the required mana sensitivity, accuracy, and control were much lower than a beast creators, who would have to clash against dangerous transmuted mana particles and almost sentient plants in some cases in order to refine them to concoct an evolution solution. As such, it was only rational for the Flays to think that Jason would have to practice concocting cheaper potions first before he would start improving until his master allowed him to create evolution solutions. Chapter 250 Satisfaction by Hydesgrain. Enveloped by a white cocoon, one could hear a faint crackling sound within Jason, as his mana core broke through into the next level, finally reaching the 6th adept rank. Slowly dissipating, the white cocoon revealed Jason, whose hair fluttered lightly, as he opened his golden eyes that gleamed vibrantly. 1 month passed and there were only a few days left before the new year, but this didn't bother him much because it was nothing special for him as he inspected his strength. Not only did he decided to actively cultivate for 1 to 2 hours daily, but he also broke into the 5th and now finally even the 6th adept rank, which was mainly thanks to his cleansed mana core, mana veins ambition, and aptitude towards mana. However, this couldn't make him excited anymore, because he was still an infant in the eyes of foreign races, thanks to him being at the mid-mortal stage, which they most likely called his current rank. This was frustrating, but also motivating because he wanted to increase his strength faster than ever before, which caused him to sleep even less than before. During the last month, Jason refined his body every day for several hours in the morning, which caused his physique to reach an unthinkable degree, shocking him greatly. To think that he might ever be able to fight peak awakened beasts head-on without using a tiny bit of mana was already shocking enough, and Jason was sure that he could already fight evolved ranked beasts by using mana, without the need to rely on his affinities. He couldn't even imagine how strong he might already be, considering that each of his soul bonds became much stronger, with the Black Origin Flame overrunning the others. Because he practiced the Heaven's Hell technique 3 times a day, Jason's soul energy increased by several times, reaching the shocking number of 1,900 units, while Artemis required 250, which was the lowest among his 3 soul bonds. Scorpio, however, required only 350 soul energy units, and the Black Origin Flame was allowed to annex a total of 499 soul energy units. In the end, Jason couldn't allow his Origin Flame to annex more, because he was quite sure that his Black Fire affinity would reach the unblemished rank, which might create suspicion amongst the higher-ups in the Big 3 tournament. He still had to remain rather low profile, and even if the tournament started, Jason was unsure if he could show every single trump card he had, without creating trouble for himself, which wouldn't be possible in his opinion. However, in the end, Jason decided to think about this later on, once he figured out if old Drake had a plan to forcefully drag him away from Shane and Dahlia, and if he had a plan, what exactly it was. After refining his body in the morning, Jason continued to read books about alchemy, the concoction process, beast creation, Dahlia's diary, and much more until he felt that it was enough for the day. This was extremely important because Jason noticed after the first day practicing alchemy seriously, by experimenting with all kinds of different more or less difficult potions, that it was not as easy as it initially seemed. Meanwhile, his unique eyes were extremely helpful, while the same could be said for his superior mana mastery and memory for every single step he had to take care of. However, in the end, it was not something Jason could learn in a few days, which brought him back to the ground because his confidence and pride seemed to soar way too high, as he thought that he had to be better than everybody due to the possibility of him being a Celestia halfling. As such, Jason began to subconsciously compare himself to foreign races, which pressured him a lot, and he was unable to prevent it anymore. On one side, it was extremely beneficial for his cultivation and even body refining process, while it hindered his concoction process, where he required as much focus as possible. Jason already lost count in how often he failed to concoct potions, because he wanted to produce perfect purified potions, without impurities left behind, which increased the difficulty by a large margin. In the end, he could only strive forward, trying to learn out of his mistakes in order to prevent repeating the same mistakes one after another, which was his final goal. After slightly less than 1 month, Jason was finally able to create his first perfect peak grade 1 potion, even if it was only a fluke. Thinking that concocting the Lesser Minotaur Bloodline Unsealing Evolution solution was easier, Jason couldn't help but sigh in relief. Give me 1, maybe 2 weeks and I'm confident in concocting the evolution solution. Jason thought, not without being proud about his current achievements. He was unsure how many explosions he caused or how often the Flays rushed towards him because they thought something might have happened to him, causing Jason to feel slightly embarrassed, as he thought about it. However, rather than thinking about his failed products, Jason decided to focus on his achievements over the last month. His physique improved greatly, while he was even able to do something rank 1 alchemists can barely do after several years. Even though he was lucky, his mana eyes, high mana sensitivity control, and even more the black origin flame he owned were the major reasons for his great achievement. But more than that, his soul energy shocked Jason the most, because he would have never thought that he might reach such a high soul energy merely 7 months after his soul awakening. With 900 vacant soul energy units, he wondered what he could do with it because it was already enough to contract a peak unblemished beast. However, contracting a new soul bond now would be counterproductive, because it would amplify his physique and mana core size by a large margin, creating too much suspicion about his soul awakening star rating, which was barely at 2 stars and as such below average. Rather than focusing on contracting another soul bond, Jason was rather curious about something completely different, which he wanted to do sooner rather than later. I need my second sub-area, Jason thought, because the idea of creating an endless cycle in order to increase his soul energy was something he long since thought about. Even more so, because the needed time to practice the Heaven's Hell technique increased the more soul energy units he had. One could say that Jason's complaint was luxury, which was the case, but he didn't have enough time to do everything he wanted to and was even forced to neglect his martial arts skills and both ice and poison affinity practice in order to reach such high soul energy, without hindering his alchemy and body refining. It was a luxurious hassle, but still, something he could take care of, if he were to create his second sub-area with the help of the splitting mind technique he also continued to read. In the end, Jason couldn't continue with his negligence towards his martial art techniques, even if he were to practice the Heaven's Hell technique fewer as he felt uncomfortable by continuing with his current path. If I can't take everything at once, I'll just take one step after another. Exclamation mark. Even if he were to practice the Heaven's Hell technique only 1 or 2 times a day, while exchanging the other practices with him honing his martial arts skills and affinity proficiency practice, it would benefit him extremely. Determined about his decision, Jason felt that he should sell a few potions, in order to increase his funds once again, because he only had 280 star notes left from his initial 330, after deducting the funds he loaned Greg. This meant, he paid 50 star notes in the month he started to refine his body, which was way too high, considering that he would have to continue refining his body, even if the extent would be significantly lower than the month before, where he established his first tiny foundation. After establishing a marginal foundation, he could slowly continue to refine his body, without the fear of a possible deteriorating process, which was a possible outcome, if one were to disregard a small starting foundation in the initial phase, that would still take a long time to complete. Pondering for some time, Jason was unsure if he should walk straight into the artisan tower in order to sell the potions, by telling that his master made them and that it was his task to sell them, as it was unlikely that a 14-year-old child was capable of concocting purified grade 1 potions, even if they were not perfectly purified. Alone the fact that he was already able to concoct grade 1 potions at his tender age, without neglecting his mana gathering or combat prowess, was extremely uncommon and could be said to be a genius talent. However, Jason didn't dare to think like this, because he still continued to compare himself to other foreign races, even if he was not sure what stage they could reach if one were to compare their age with each other. Thinking about this, he was always reminded about the Shadow Walker, who was said to be a prodigy from the younger generation, which was an unclear term. Without knowing to what extent the Shadow Walker was considered a prodigy, how old he was, and how old the younger generation was. In the end, Jason could only estimate and assume things, which was not helpful and only caused him to be frustrated.